Thank you, Congressman Tong. That was really outstanding. I think you really set up the conference and the topic very well. I especially like the focus on bipartisanship. It's great to hear. We have a distinguished group of panelists. I'd like to invite the panelists to make your way forward. They're in the very back of the room. Make your way forward as I'm introducing you, and join me on the stage. First will be our moderator, Jim Hauser. Jim is the group president of Delaware North. Delaware North is a global leader in hospitality and food service management. And he'll be joined by panelists Geoff Bolan, who is the CEO of Sustainable Travel International, Shelby Coffey, the vice chair of the Newseum right here in Washington, D.C., Lou Jacobs, the CEO of Delaware North, Edna Johnson, an executive with Michelin, which you remember not only does tires, but also does the Michelin Guide. So we hope to get some insight as to the up-and-coming five-star restaurants. And finally, Laura Lott, the president and CEO of the American Alliance of Museums. Jim and panelists, thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Jim Hauser. As they said, I'm Group President of Delaware North. I oversee the company's three subsidiaries, the Parks and Resorts, the Patina Restaurant Group, and the Sports Service Division. I'm honored to moderate today's panel on cultural tourism. And we have a great panel today, as they've introduced Geoff Bolan, CEO of Sustainable Travel International, Shelby Coffey, Vice Chair of Newseum, Lou Jacobs, Co-CEO of Delaware North, Edna Johnson, Vice President of Communications and Brands with Michelin North America, and Laura Lott, President and CEO of American Alliance of Museums. So we'll get started. And the first question I have is for all our panelists. How important is tourism to the arts, and tourism and the arts to economic growth? We'll start with Lou, if you don't mind.
Sure, Jim. The answer is very important as far as I'm concerned. I think the best anecdotal evidence you'll see in our national parks. By definition, our national parks are capacity constrained as far as hospitality offerings, and that's for a number of reasons. But when you go outside the parks and you see these gateway communities, it's really astonishing how important tourism is, and it's very much the lifeblood for the community. It's every bit as much as you'd see in a manufacturing town, a company town, where the tourism drives all the jobs, all of the economic activity, and it really is critical to the survival of that community.
Shelby?
Two quick examples, one macro and one micro. When I was editor of the Los Angeles Times in the late 80s, the Cold War ended, and the peace dividend came. It was good for a lot of people, wasn't good for the Southern California aerospace industry, which crashed, and it was a regional crash. If anybody was there and remembers that, it was a very tough time. How, with the multiplier effect of aerospace jobs, were we going to come back as a region? And one of the major things, and I just saw the most recent figures on it, was what was already a fair tourist industry began to build, the Getty Museum. Grauman's Theater had always been one thing. They built out at Universal. They built out cities. And so now, I saw the most recent studies that show it is over 40 million visitors, bring in $30 billion, and bring on over 300,000 jobs, probably well more than that. These were just specifically. The micro example is one that proves the case in a smaller way. Our marketing officer at the Newseum worked at Graceland before he came to us, and partly because of his good work. And he tells the story of how Graceland came about only because Priscilla Presley, who was being importuned to give Graceland to the city or something like that, was asked by her money manager, let's create a private area. Now, as our marketing officer says, wherever you go in the world, and he's seen it in Kazakhstan, in Israel, in Singapore, you mention Memphis, and they say Graceland. So there are ways to identify your city, and that has tremendous economic boom, both in large and small.
Thank you, Shelby. Edna, you want to answer that question?
Absolutely. So I'll answer the question with the Michelin Red Guide lens on, and I think probably as everyone knows, and to digress for just a moment, Washington D.C. Last month received its first Michelin starred restaurants. There was a lot of enthusiasm here. It was a pleasure for me to be part of that. We enjoyed greatly announcing the Washington, D.C. Red Guide restaurants at the French ambassador's residence. But to answer the question specifically, so Michelin rates extraordinary restaurants that are worth a trip, that are worth a separate trip to visit the restaurant, and they're awarded 1, 2, and 3 stars. Our role is to rate those restaurants and then provide those restaurants broadly and widely to the public. So what I'm about to say, we have learned from the restaurants and we've read in the media. So I know this only anecdotally, not from our own research, but anecdotally, we know that when a restaurant receives a Michelin star, its reservations, its business increases as much as 30%. And when restaurants receive 2 or 3 stars, their international clients, their international guests increase by 15 to 20%, which is pretty extraordinary.
It is. Geoff, you want to take that question?
Sure, thanks. When I hear questions like that, data, most any question, data starts streaming through my head and facts and a couple of things to think about. You know, around the globe, travel and tourism represents 1 in 11 jobs. It's like almost 10% of the world is engaged in tourism. That's not the ancillary effect, right? That's just the straight on. I think about places around the globe and places in this country where people travel. So you know, if you're thinking about you go to Peru, people go to Machu Picchu. It's a whole other country, right? And you think about going to the national parks. I live in Seattle, which is home to I think one of the least visited. I think, if I'm not mistaken, North Cascades National Park is one of the least visited. It's really beautiful, everybody. But there's Yosemite and Yellowstone, which are equally beautiful, right? So there's this notion of going to the checkoff place, and Lou talked about kind of the over compression that happens in parks. You know, places next to parks are kind of equally beautiful. The same wildlife that walks in, walks out, right? So you know, the world isn't met up with barriers. And thinking about it, just a couple more facts, or just you know, the latest news. No, not the DC latest news, but the recent study about millennials, you know, they're not into acquiring and goods and assets. They're about having experiences, right? So think about the shift of money, and then think about the shift of money that's happening in the business world. And while I don't think Uber and Lyft are necessarily indicative of travel and tourism, they're there. But if you do think about Airbnb, you're talking about a tremendous shift. You add in companies like Southwest Airlines, right? All of a sudden, the opportunity to travel, right, is not I can do this or I can do this. It's you can do it at 1,000 different levels. So I think kind of that's where I see, you know, the world going. It's more people traveling to more places, and more places, different places, having an opportunity to capture those visitors.
Thank you, Geoff. And Laura, we'll finish up with you on that question.
Sure. So we in the museum field, of course, feel that cultural tourism is hugely important. People are always surprised when I tell them that there are north of 30,000 museums in the U.S. alone. That's more than double the number of Starbucks, by the way, just for comparison. And that's, you know, museums and science centers, historic sites, children's museums, all different kinds of those institutions. And so we know that they're everywhere in every zip code in the country, and they're enormously popular. There are 850 million annual visits to museums nationwide. That, for comparison, is 6.5 times the total attendance at all major league sporting events and theme parks combined, actually. So we know they're enormously popular. And in part, I think because they're offering those kinds of experiences that you're saying that people really enjoy, really need. And increasingly, museums are offering not just solo experiences, but communal experiences, and those that are very immersive and experiential for people to really get a sense of the place they're visiting. I'll add one example, actually two examples to Shelby's example in Los Angeles. Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in Bentonville, Arkansas, has put that city on the tourism map. In 5 years since its opening, it's welcomed 2.7 million people to Bentonville, Arkansas, this teeny tiny little airport, if you've ever flown in there. They come from all 50 states, and they come from 6 of the 7 continents. It's driven restaurants and hotels and a whole sort of tourism industry in a city that didn't have much of an arts culture before that museum. It's now frequently cited in the top places of to go. I think most recently in Lonely Planet's top 10 places to go in 2016. The other example is Chattanooga, Tennessee. So the aquarium, the Tennessee Aquarium, went into the downtown when there wasn't anything else really there. It actually started as a community initiative to try to revitalize the city. And it's been its impact has been really well documented, and it's actually used as a roadmap for other communities that are looking to inspire that kind of a renaissance in a location. So the University of Tennessee just analyzed the museum's economic impact on the entire county that surrounds Chattanooga, and found the aquarium and its out-of-town guests contribute over $100 million in economic impact annually. And when you compare that to the $75 million just once that the community put in to actually build the aquarium and invest in it, it's an amazing return.
Thank you, Laura. My next question is for Geoff. What is sustainable travel, and why is it important?
That's a good question. Sometimes I wonder if we're misbranded. The first thing to say is a challenge that we confront. We're a nonprofit, but the challenge that we confront is the fact that travel and tourism to most people represents, at least in my mind, represents one of a couple of things. One is fun, right, leisure. 2 is business travel, which is unnecessary evil. And 3 is just an industry, right? And that doesn't actually represent what we're about. I mean, our goal is looking at the world and saying that we're sort of a conservation and development organization, and we look in the fact that in most countries around the world, tourism is one of the top generators of GDP, hard currency, and so if you're trying to address challenges of economic development or resource issues or climate change or whatever it might be, you kind of want to look and say, what's the biggest wrench? Or hammer, or whatever it might be, and that's our approach. So we look at the notion of sustainability in tourism as kind of a partnership, and saying, if you are trying to protect beautiful places and sensitive places around the globe, and if you're trying to empower people, improve their lives, affect families, then let's do that through a very strong engine. And it's also a strong engine that has the ability that historically the travel and tourism in the past in some areas has had a negative impact or sort of an additional negative impact in addition to revenues, because you don't think about what's happening. You don't think about the reef, you don't think about the national park, you don't think about the trails and wildlife. And our view is there is a better way to approach both the kind of work that's been done in the past and the kind of work going forward with travel and tourism to generate jobs, to have the same kinds of tours and the same kinds of developments, but with a lower impact approach. And so for us, sustainability in tourism is just a mechanism to improve people's lives and resources. So I hope that explains.
Thank you, Geoff. Shelby, for those in the audience who are not familiar, what is the history and mission of Newseum?
The Newseum celebrates the First Amendment, and it is 8 years old. It is right down Pennsylvania Avenue. We opened it in order to tell the story from the Babylonian tablets to Twitter of how people have tried to make sense of the world, because that's what news is. But most importantly, the broad mission is right there on a marble slab, which has the 5 freedoms of the First Amendment. I'm not going to quiz anybody, but it is speech, which is always very popular, religion, which is mostly popular, the press, which goes up and down, and the freedom to peaceably assemble and seek redress of grievance. That's the right to petition. That's the lobbyist freedom. And these were all freedoms which were set up by the founding fathers as they threw off the yoke of the British. And I would argue that that set of ideas has been among the most powerful binding material that has kept our republic going these 200 plus years. What we wanted to do was tell the story, and in part we concentrate on the news because they are stories. And if you listen to what each of the people, including the congressman, were talking about, heritage, historic preservation, the arts, the power of story is part of all of them. We are wired for story. I could show you the evolutionary psychology reasons for that. But people are intrigued and fascinated by that. We have 15 galleries and 15 theaters which tell the story, 140 video screens and 140 touch screens. We think we're the most interactive museum in the world. And why was that? Because, as has been alluded to, the experience economy has come to museums and to other places. Not just millennials, but I would also say that boomers. And good time for boomers. We took back the presidency, both contenders out of the boomer generation. Whichever side you're on, we're back. And but you would find in lots of surveys that the power of that story is important, and it matters to our sense of the country. So we wanted to be in the heart of American heritage. I will tell you just one more story about it. I'm old enough at age 70 to recall what Pennsylvania Avenue was over 50 years ago when John F. Kennedy was sworn in as president. And there were pawn shops and bars you wouldn't want to be caught in, even with the sun still up, much less after night. JFK at the end of that said, this cannot be America's Main Street. And so he set 3 young bureaucrats to devising what became the Pennsylvania Avenue Renaissance Plan. One of them was Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who later became a senator, a true intellectual. And just as we were about to open, he came and gave us the story of how this was the last major plan President Kennedy signed off on 2 days before he went to Dallas. If you look at Moynihan's career, he kept it going, kept nudging. He served in both Republican and Democratic administrations. And now what Jack Kennedy wanted was to have Pennsylvania Avenue look more like Paris, has come true. And Moynihan said to us, "You're the last jewel in the crown." And so we wear that like a red badge of courage. That's our story.
Thank you, Shelby. That's a great story. Lou, what does the future look like for Delaware North and the tourism industry?
Well, pretty exciting, I guess. I think, look, the hospitality business is no different than any other business, which is if you're doing business like you did 10 years ago, you're in a death spiral. You've got to be in sort of a state of continual reinvention and trying to envision what your industry is going to look like going forward. And you guys have all touched on it. I mean, people travel differently today, and they have different, it's more immersive, more experiential. They want to be told a story. They want to connect. They want to be outdoors. There's a lot of general themes going on. And so I'll give you one example. We have 4 hotels in West Yellowstone, and everything from a flagged Holiday Inn, conventional indoor pool, meeting space, to more regional sort of Western themed hotels. A couple of years ago, we embarked on this concept called Explorer Cabins. And what an Explorer Cabin is it's a more communal experience. There's a number of cabins spread around a campfire. People recreate. There's 3-bedroom cabins. People recreate as families or in groups, and encouraged to be outdoors in the evening. And we have a number of people going around telling stories and trying to draw out the Yellowstone experience so people have a more authentic experience rather than booking it. Nothing wrong with booking a couple of hotel rooms in the Holiday Inn, but we had initially put together our budgets where these were going to be sort of mid-range. Their occupancy is well above any other product we have in the market. The revenue per evening is well above anything we have in the market. And we fast forward, we put them in the Ohio State parks. We're working on doing the same product outside of Sequoia National Park, outside of Yosemite National Park. So continually trying, you know, I don't care if you make toothpaste or build bicycles. If you're trying to do things the same way you did them 10 years ago, you're in trouble. And so continually trying to reinvent the travel experience and anticipate what the next generation of travel looks like is critical.
Thank you, Lou. Edna, I'm going to ask the question everybody's been wondering is, how did the tire company get into the restaurant rating business?
You know, I think it's actually one of the most brilliant brand extension stories ever, anywhere. So we have to go back about 100 years. The Michelin brothers, Andre and Edouard, in France, had started a tire company, and they had invented this radical notion of a car tire with air in it. Radical notion. And the company was young. By the early 20s, cars were becoming more prevalent, and air-filled car tires were much more prevalent. But cars were used for utilitarian purposes. I need to get from A to B. The Michelin brothers invented this notion of notable restaurants that were worth a trip. They were worth a drive, so that people would get in their cars and drive on these tires to notable, worthwhile restaurants. And they, with this notion, by the way, also invented the restaurant rating system, 1, 2, and 3 stars. So that occurred almost 100 years ago. When we look at its viability today, it's perhaps worth noting that this year, Michelin will launch more new red guides in a single year than in any other year in Michelin's history. And DC was part of that as the 4th guide in the United States.
Thank you, Edna. Laura, from your perspective and expertise, how are the arts and the cultural institutions important to the economy?
Yeah, well, I gave some of the numbers before, but I wanted to talk a little bit about, Congressman Tonko talked about a sense of place. And I think that, there's some concern in there in our field, in the museum field, about, the future in this wired world of, real experiences. But I see actually it becoming, those real places, those real things, those real experiences being even more important as we go forward. Maybe it's because you can pay your bills and keep in touch with your friends online from wherever you are. But if you want to look into John Glenn's space capsule and you want to see how cramped that space is, and you want to look at the heat marks on the heat shield, and think about what the heck was he thinking as he's propelling out into outer space. There's exactly one place that you can do that. It's down the street at the Smithsonian. If you want to stand in the place where Martin Luther King Jr. was preparing for his remarks when he was assassinated, you must go to the Lorraine Motel in Memphis. And there's no experience like that. And we know there was just a recent study done that asked people of all generations about their desire to engage in arts and culture, when they were on vacation, a destination that they're going to. And the idea was highly rated by baby boomers and Gen Xers, but it was most highly rated by millennials, who we know value those authentic kinds of experiences. So I think it's important now and will continue to grow in importance.
Thank you, Laura. The CED is a policy-focused group, so I'd like to ask each of our panelists to talk about what policies they think can and should be implemented to support and encourage tourism and travel. We'll start with Shelby.
I think one of the things that we look back on that was most important was the great help that Mayor Anthony Williams gave us in the DC government. as we were coming over. Some of you probably know that the Pennsylvania Avenue is a special place. You go through an arts commission. There are a number of ways in which the city government might hang things up. He was helpful, as were a number of others. I don't want to just give sole credit, but I think that there is nothing like people at the top of the relevant government who see the power of whether it be arts or heritage or historic preservation, see that and help set the tone so that bureaucracies do not get lost in eddies.
Thank you, Shelby. Lou?
I'm going to get this wrong, so I apologize in advance, but there's an adage about the national parks. The mission is to maximize the effect of parks on people and minimize the effects of people on parks. And it really, it's a terrific mantra, but I think the scales have been tipped a little bit, and we are taking preservation as a much higher priority than visitation. And I think particular communities and demographics are badly underrepresented in our parks. The handicapped community, the urban community, the minority communities are all are insufficiently represented as parks visitors. And when that happens, we lose an important constituency that should be advocating for our parks and care about our parks. So my biggest policy concern would be get people to appreciate and visit and enjoy our parks.
Thank you, Lou. Laura?
I think, so as Congressman Tonko was kind enough to point out, the nonprofit arts and culture field returns $5 in every dollar that's invested in public funding in the field. So it's often talked about as, a drain on budgets, when actually the math is quite clear that it's a pretty great investment. So I think in terms of policy, maintaining support for arts and culture and national parks, at the federal level, we're maintaining support for charitable deductions and things like that allow the public to support these institutions it's a no-brainer. So I think that's the first thing. The second is that AM was proud to support some legislation a few years ago that created, a strategy for the U.S. as a travel destination for folks abroad. The organization Brand USA that was created out of that legislation has been doing that and has seen some success. And there was a lot of talk about trade in the presidential election this past season. And let's not forget that international tourism here to the U.S. is an export trade for us. So something that I think it's important for us to invest in as a country.
Thank you, Laura. Geoff?
I was in Colorado last week with, we work with the town of Vail and a nonprofit there, and now soon to be with Vail Resorts. And the work is focused on the local businesses. And when I say local businesses, hotel, restaurant, plumbing company, which was a shock to me, liquor store, shock to me. I mean, there are 200 or so businesses in this Vail area. And what they're doing is essentially monitoring their impact. How much water, how much energy, how much waste, things like that. And they do it for different reasons. Our reason for this program is to mitigate impact, right? This is sensitive environments. You're talking about creeks and rivers, mountain, water, et cetera. And it was amazing for me to see that how much these businesses adopted the program, and not only adopted it because some of them were environmentally focused, some of them saw the potential for money savings, some of them did it because their neighbors and friends were doing it. And I don't really care why people get there. What I care about is the results. And I wish you all could see this award ceremony. These businesses who were getting up there super excited about the work they did, showing off the money they saved, changing cooling systems, reductions in water, all these changes. And so my sort of dream and aspiration is that there's essentially a better environment for celebrating businesses that take these actions, right? That it's not really seen as such a stigma anymore to be thinking about your impact and recognizing that when you manage your impact, you probably save a lot of money. Some of these businesses saved a ton of money. Some of them didn't save anything, but they had engaged employees. And I think that everybody on this panel and all of you know the cost of an engaged and excited employee the value of that is tremendous. So I just think that the notion of an environment where companies and individuals are celebrated for making these steps for whatever reason would be an interesting direction to see us go.
Thank you, Geoff. Edna?
The Michelin Group is fully committed to sustainable mobility, much like the sustainability that, Geoff, you just talked about. But our strong belief is that our responsibility is to help people move to places they need or want to move to in the most environmentally responsible way. So whether that's in the manufacturing process, whether that's in the products and services that we offer, or any multitude of things, it's our responsibility to be environmentally responsible so that, and because today we're talking about tourism, hospitality, et cetera, so that 100 years from now or 500 years from now, people will be able to enjoy these things as we are today. And since we've mentioned Yellowstone, I'll say that Michelin has a long-standing relationship with Yellowstone National Park because of its commitment to sustainability. We provide tires to the park that are highly fuel efficient, and we help the park in that way achieve its goals around CO2 emissions. We have just spent the last couple of years replacing some of the pathways in Yellowstone National Park with a new, very porous walkway material made of recycled tires that allows water to seep through the pathway in ways that help sustain the geyser basin in that area. That's part of our commitment to sustainability. And we've also partnered with the park and some other organizations right now. We're working on a future of mobility in Yellowstone National Park. Yellowstone is very proud of the large number of visitors they're now attracting. I may get this wrong. This year, I think I'll see the highest number of visitors they've ever had in the park. It's more than 1 million in the year alone. But the park is at risk of being loved to death. So how can people move through or experience the park in the future in a way that preserves both the park and people's experiences of the park? And so that's the kind of commitment that we as a company have and that we hope other companies will embrace and share with us.
Thank you, Edna. Geoff, what does the future for sustainable travel, what does it look like for the Sustainable Travel Organization?
We were at lunch, Lou made a statement, and I was like, wow, that's perfect. I don't actually have to go up and talk because he was describing sustainability, and then I just heard this, which was, you're all making my life easy because the fact is it's the sustainability, which is another one of the buzzwords that we really could toss out, but what we're talking about is I saw something, will my kids see it in the same or similar condition, will the grandkids, et cetera, et cetera. And so I want to put us out of business, to be honest. I would love for, as I said a moment ago with these businesses, individual businesses, to think about and automatically think about we're constantly trying to reduce our impact. And just to cite an example, I don't want to, Vail is, no one's promoting that they stop having skiing and then they stop heating the sidewalks so people, that uses energy, but the alternative is people falling and breaking their necks. So that's definitely not what this is about. This is about folks operating within whatever their business streams are and just getting it right. And so I would like to be out of business. I would like to take the power out of the individual's hands. So when you go to the bathroom, the light goes on everywhere, and when you walk out, it goes off. Right? So we don't have to think about, did I turn off? Did I lock the door? Did I turn off the engine? Anybody sit with their car running, and realize, why is my car running? And then you're like, I hate that. And then you do it, but then you don't. What would be wrong with the engine going off? And then going back on when you hit, like a hybrid kind of does. And so I think the future is, unfortunately, we're going to have to be around for a while to help folks. We're making a lot of progress, but I think that sort of wisdom and technology and forward thinking should take a lot of these decisions out of people's hands, save a heck of a lot of money, do a lot of great sort of prospects for the environment, and leave it for the future. So that's my hope and desire, that we remove, we make these decisions and these actions, we get us out of it. We make it a little bit idiot-proof and just make it systemic. When we've gotten there, at a light switch level, at a car energy level, at awarding a concession, a tourism concession in a national park where it goes through the right process, it doesn't go to your brother, and it doesn't go to your cousin who's got the other 5 concessions and they don't manage it right, I think we're in a good place.
Thank you, Geoff. Lou, what role does technology play in changing how the consumers travel?
So I have a college graduate son, headed off to Europe to go travel and explore after graduation. 3 things were really critical. He took his phone, his passport, and a credit card. Obviously, we know the phone acts as a lot of things. Acts as a camera. It's your travel agent. It's your source of communication. Passport, we understand, but the fact that we are moving towards a cashless society is the single most important trend from a business perspective. So I'll give you, for example, we have all the hospitality at Wembley Stadium in London, and we recently had the Jacksonville Jaguars game. First time in Wembley's history that more transactions were non-cash than were cash. And the interesting trend is the non-cash transaction was 20% higher in revenue than the average cash transaction. So not only do you have all of the associated costs going out of the system that are related to cash and the handling of cash and the monitoring of cash, but the idea that consumers will buy up because of the convenience of the credit card and not having to manage that cash is a trend that I think we're going to see a lot more of.
Thank you, Lou. Edna, how do you weigh the value of diner reviews versus professional reviews of the food industry in the restaurants?
They're both very, very important, and we've seen in recent years a revolution in consumer engagement, commentary around restaurants, and so consumer reviews. We all know lots of sites and opportunities for consumers to talk about their restaurant experience, and yet the Michelin Stars endure and are, in fact, probably more popular than ever in their lives because they offer expert opinion. So when we take expert opinion with consumer enthusiasm and engagement, we have an extraordinary formula of success. It's been a fascinating revolution to watch. And we think it has brought only great things.
Thank you, Edna. Laura, what does the future look like for the cultural tourism industry?
Well, we know it's on the rise. I think the U.S. Department of Commerce just did a study and put out a statistic that in the last 10 years, international visitation to arts and culture destinations here in the U.S. has grown from I think 18% to 28%. And as I mentioned before, that's a good trade position for the United States. So I think it's on the rise. All the data that is out there about what people value in their leisure time is about experiences, is about authenticity. So whether that is having not just packing the kids in the car and going to a campsite, but an actual, sort of educational experience at that destination through a sustainable travel experience or a national park visit or a museum visit. I think that's the trend, and that will be the future.
Okay, this question is for the whole panel. So how have tourism trends changed in recent years? We'll start with Shelby again.
One of the things that we are most pleased by is seeing the millennials, as has been mentioned, looking for their experiences. The architect who did the Newseum, or rather the designer, is a fellow named Ralph Applebaum, who is the international guru of the experience destination. He did the Holocaust Museum and others. And the point that people want is they don't just want to look at what's on the wall. That's why we have the very short videos which explain, for example, we have the most number of pieces of the Berlin Wall outside of Germany and one of 3 guard towers left from Checkpoint Charlie. But you have to go in and look for a lot of young people at the videos that explain in 5 minutes what all that was about, how the wall went up, how news broke through, and how Tom Brokaw was the guy who asked the question of the last East German interior minister at 3 in the morning, are you going to let people go through? And put this down. Go through the wall, and he said, oh yeah, they thought they would buy some tchotchkes and come on back to East Germany. Fat chance. So Tom came down for the 25th anniversary, and I said, Tom, the only thing wrong with this video is it makes it look like you single-handedly ended communism in 1989. He said, well, Shelby, it was a heady time for America. That, by the way, is an A- imitation of Tom Brokaw. Yeah, maybe you all can do better. But in any case, what we want, and it's one of the reasons that we have throughout the Newseum, we have the actual door from the Watergate that was taped open by the burglars. We have the broadcast antenna from the North Tower of the World Trade Center. We have Rupert Murdoch's deal telephone, on which $20 billion worth of deals were done. That was so interesting that Business Week did a whole story on it. Who was on the speed dial? And it is elements like that where people want the authenticity of seeing the real thing. If you come, and you're all welcome, very much. And let me know. I can make sure you get good tickets. And if I'm there and we're lucky, I can give you a little of what I call the red carpet Warren Buffett tour, which I have given to the sage of Omaha, accept no substitutes, and you will see any number of the real things that show, as with something that David Rubenstein recently gave us, which is the first printed copy in a newspaper of the Declaration of Independence. What you'll see is something that reaches for the younger generation. How are we going to make that come alive? So we went to a graphic artist. Does anybody here know about Congressman John Lewis's March to Freedom graphic novels that he has done, which tell the story? Yes, a couple of people do. Well, we helped sort of birth that a little bit. The congressman has been very good to us. So what we did, having this Declaration of Independence up, was we went to one of the graphic artists, and in bright colors you will see the whole story of the Declaration of Independence and the fight with the British and all put in the wall. And it not only resonates with young people, but it's another quick way to get your basic facts on the path to the Declaration. Telling stories those different ways and in newer ways, seeing what younger people like, is one of the things we do. Final point, just one more, is that if I could wave a magic wand, I would change the world so that more people, young people, are taught critical thinking and their use in the media. Young people spend 5 hours a day looking at screens. It used to be the gatekeeper world back when I was the editor of the Los Angeles Times. It is now the Tower of Babel world, meaning anything can get on. It's part garbage heap and part gold mine. How to know the difference. So we send out, now we have 2.5 to 3 million people in education that we do programs for. But I think that is where the future lies for us and for those experiences.
Thank you, Shelby. Lou, how have tourism trends changed in recent years?
I don't really have a lot to add other than, look, what's been said before. It's experiential, it's enriching, it's customized. I will add one word that's very unnerving when you're in the business, and that's spontaneous. We used to book rooms year out. You know, we'd look at June, July, and August in our peak season, and well, we're booked up. We have some very anxious moments the week before. They're showing up. They're still there. The room rates are holding, but people are much more spontaneous.
Thank you, Lou. Laura?
Yeah, I'd echo that entirely, Lou, and no, for even our colleagues in some of the other kinds of arts and cultural organizations, performance-based arts and culture organizations. It's unnerving, the spontaneity. The only other thing I would add is that, and I don't have great data on this. I'm actually looking to figure out how to get it, but anecdotally, we're seeing people spend more time at least in museums than maybe they used to. The new African American Museum of History and Culture has apparently an average visit time of 6 hours, versus sort of the other, maybe the Air and Space Museum, where I think it's something like 45 minutes, just for comparison purposes. Not saying either bad or good, but so people are going to these places as destinations. They're wanting to not only visit the museum but have lunch there, stay for a wine reception, maybe stay for a concert, do other things. They want to sort of soak up these places, and so I think that's an interesting trend that we've anecdotally observed and need to kind of quantify and figure out how to embrace going forward.
Thank you, Laura. Geoff?
I used to live in DC years ago, and I was younger, and so when I come back, I think of myself as young, but I'm not, right? The glasses to read your phone. A couple things. So, Lou, the one thing you missed you made two small mistakes when you talked about your son's trip. One was the charger, which I know he had, which is actually, not just sort of think about technology, is really the most important thing out there. Right? I mean, your phone is only as good as your charger and your phone being charged. And I don't say that jokingly. Like, I've had conversations with folks, that's it. The other thing is, he brought his phone, but it's not actually a phone, is it? He doesn't really probably call to many people. And that's the other, a little bit of changing mentality. We all have our phones and our cell phones, and really that's, we might be talking with people, but if you look at a different generation, the sound coming in and out of that is not talking to people, it's music and whatnot. So just to think about it in those ways. And it is all about that device, and that's what's changing. You can it sort of sews up all these things, right? You can click and book without advance. Your options are plentiful. The technology is simple. The detail is rich, and the personalization is incredible, right? And so we spoke earlier about going out to again, I'm at Seattle, the Pacific, Olympic Peninsula. You go out to the Clay Lock Lodge or other places along the West Coast, which if you haven't been, by the way, it's killer out there. And you can read about which is the place, which is the trail you want to go on, which is the operator who might want to take you on a guide. And by the way, and as I did this, why don't you go down when you're near this this boat dock, if it's in the month of July and August, because the guys usually sell king salmon off the boat, and they'll fillet it for you right there. And by the way, if those who hadn't had king salmon in season, you're missing something. It's a lot better when you found a piece of information and then you bought it and then you made it, right? That's the experience that's going on. So all of those things wrapped together, it's so incredibly at your fingertips. Last thing I'll say is you asked if you could have that data. We actually did some research, and it is around the sustainable traveler, but I think it would be fair to use a proxy sustainable for the experiential traveler, people that are looking for a deeper experience. And they spend more. They stay longer and they spend more. So there's the proxy. We have the data. And I think it's all about that deeper experience. And they're going to stay and they're going to eat at the restaurant because it's not necessarily about how do I avoid that expense. That expense is part of my experience. So that's where I see it going.
Okay, Edna, how have tourism trends changed in recent years?
I'll mention one thing that, Geoff, you're getting at, and that is the revolution that social media has had on destination travel, destination restaurant experiences. So in social media, we see family, friends, people we admire, maybe people we don't admire, but we follow. We see their experiences. We read about their experiences. That helps us form our own opinions, perhaps even make us think of places that we want to go or we want to dine or that we want to visit that we'd never thought of before. And it's been an absolutely extraordinary revolution. Social media has changed destination travel.
Thank you. And I guess we're out of time now. So I want to thank our panelists for their thoughts and wisdom. Thank you very much.